Hello, and welcome to the Superintendent Spotlight podcast, where each month we will explore an important topic or initiative being worked on in the Mashpee Public Schools. I am your host, David Thompson, the proud Interim Superintendent of the Mashpee Public Schools, and I welcome you to our podcast. Okay, so the subject of today's podcast is MTSS, which is multiple tiered system of support, and I've got three exemplary guests with me today. Brian Kehrl, who's the assistant principal at the Quash, Hope Hanscom, who is our assistant superintendent, and the principal at the Coombs School, Mary Kate O'Brien. So we're going to talk about this and answer some questions and try to get into a little more depth on MTSS. And Hope, if we can kind of start with you and tell everyone out there, what is MTSS?
Sure. Hi, everybody. This is Hope Hanscom. Happy to talk about one of my favorite subjects, MTSS, which is a multi-tiered system of supports. So in Mashpee, we've been using MTSS for a long time, and so what we're going to talk about today is the way in which we're revisiting it as we learn and grow. So a multi-tiered system of supports is really looking at every child getting what they need in order to access school. And so that is done by thinking about instruction, about our resources, about behavior, performance in the academic area, thinking about it in terms of tiers. So all students come to school with a variety of skill sets. And when we put kids in a class together, they come in having different needs. So we think about tiers and how we meet those needs. So tier one is providing the general sort of interventions and instruction for all kids. It's every kid should be able to access what they're learning. And tier one is really, it's a universal tier for all students. So most of the time, it could be something like providing visuals with verbal instructions. It might be something like giving students choice in how they respond to a question. It's universal, and about 80% of students, the research shows, respond well to tier one interventions. If a student is not making the progress we want to see at tier one, then we consider moving into tier two. And tier two provides tier one support, so that same support that everybody gets, plus additional interventions. And this usually is in a small group, perhaps. So the way that the instruction is provided is in a smaller group. It might be more frequent instruction. It might be using more manipulatives, more hands-on, different ways of having students access materials. And the research shows that about 15% of students need their instruction to be in tier two. And then if students are continuing to not make progress in the way that we want to see with tier one and tier two supports, because remember, it's additive, you're adding on these additional supports, then we look at tier three, which is really the most intensive support system in place for general education. And so tier three often is individualized supports. It is much more frequent, so they're still getting tier one in the classroom. They're getting that tier two small group type of instruction. And then tier three, like I said, most of the time individualized, and it's more frequent. So it's the idea of adding and adding and adding until the student is getting, so much support that they can access the curriculum at the grade level. If that is not working for a student, then there are a lot of other avenues that we discuss, including more formalized plans like 504 plans or special education. But most of the time, about 5% of students need tier three. The goal of MTSS is really to allow, as I said, students to access the curriculum in whatever way makes sense for them and to take away barriers from that access. And so my awesome colleagues and I, we've been working on revamping this. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but we are really excited to reinvigorate and reframe how we provide supports for kids this year.
Can I just jump in there?
Sure, Brian.
Thanks. This is Brian Kehrl. I'm from Quashnet. One visual that's often associated with MTSS is a pyramid. So if you picture the base of the pyramid being kind of broad and wide, and that's tier one, and then as you move up through the pyramid, it narrows. So the middle band would be tier two, and then the very top of the pyramid would be tier three, and that's sort of like the smallest group and also the most intense and most kind of resource heavy intervention to support students. So I think that kind of having that picture in mind just helps the kind of describe how the system is organized.
And this is Mary Kate O'Brien from Coombs, and I agree, I love the visual, Brian. And it just really is that intensified instruction, and it narrows that focus as it goes up that pyramid, and it really does make a difference for the majority of our kids.
And one just piece I forgot to say that I want to make sure I include is that you're not just talking about a student making progress in a general way. We're talking about interventions on specific areas of skill deficit. So it's not just, Hope is struggling. Oh, and this is Hope talking. Sorry, I forgot to say that. This Hope is struggling with reading. We drill down, our assessments are such that we look at what area of reading is Hope struggling with and make sure we tie the interventions to that specific skill deficit. And that's what shows the greatest outcomes for kids. So I meant to add that. So thanks to my colleagues for reminding me about that piece as well.
It's certainly about skill building, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So how might a teacher notice a skill deficit and need to use MTSS? What are some tools that they have in the toolbox to identify?
Well, I'm happy to jump in there. One of the things that we do use are benchmark assessments in both reading and math. So 3 times a year, students participate in what we use as STAR assessments. And as teacher teams and administrators, we go through those scores and really look to see where the students are falling out. And it helps us identify who might need those additional supports during that time, as well as regular ongoing assessments, whether it is their unit tests in Wonders, for example, because both elementary schools are using Wonders. And I'm definitely speaking from an elementary perspective, possibly Hope could share more at the high school level. But we use multiple assessments also in our Reveal Math program as well. And it helps us identify who might need extra support with a specific skill.
I can jump in there a little bit. Just one of the kind of main tenets behind MTSS is something called data-based problem solving. So our now interim special education director has a sticker on her Chromebook. I love it. It's sort of like a tagline. It says data or it didn't happen. And so for MTSS, you need to have data. You need to kind of be able to point to something in a concrete way and say, this is the area where the student needs specific support. So the teacher is not kind of overwhelmed with trying to do 1,000 things. Instead, it's using data to identify the particular area that will have the highest impact on the student.
And I'll add just a little bit from the middle high school perspective. This is Hope again, and I work in all 3 buildings. I didn't say that. And so at the middle high school, they also use the STAR assessment in reading and math up through grade 10. And then the teachers also and educators use grades and sort of formative assessments as well. But one of the things that's really important when we think about using grades, particularly grades 7 through 12, is when we look at grades, we're not just looking at an overall grade. Student is doing poorly in math, so we're going to provide intervention in math. We look at where those grades are. In other words, is it that the student hasn't done any homework and that's why their grade is poor? Well, that's not a math issue. That's an executive functioning issue. And we're going to provide tiered support and explicit instruction in how to organize yourself so that you can do the homework. So it's not just look at the score and you do an intervention. We look at each child individually, and we look at groups of children as well, but we look at each child individually to see what is creating that score when we drill down until we get to the root cause, and that's why the tiered instruction is matched to that, and students make better outcomes as a result.
Right.
So often we see in math where it's reading the word problem is the struggle, it's not the computation.
Right.
So that has to be what we have to drill down for.
Can we just look at it from a different angle a little bit about, student behavior? Because that's another thing that we do use MTSS for. So what would be an example of a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 with student behavior? And again, you're absolutely right, targeting, the deficit so that they're making improvement.
Sure, I can kind of start that from an elementary example. A tier 1 intervention would be to support behavior would be calm classroom. Oftentimes at Quashnet, the student or teachers run a kind of mindfulness program. It's a couple minutes long. and they run it right after recess as kids are transitioning back into the classroom. It's just a way to sort of settle back into the kind of classroom environment from the more active recess environment. So for a behavioral support at the tier 1 level, accessible by everybody, but really kind of like trying to make a kind of targeted response, because we've seen that transition time is a challenge for our students. That's tier 1. At the tier 2 level, if we were finding that a student was, really struggling to make that transition, despite having access to the tier 1 intervention, we might have a quick check-in with the counselor, during the process of coming back in from recess, or a little adjustment by the teacher about what the student is doing on their way back in. So we use that same framework about data and about kind of intensity of intervention at the behavioral level as we do on the academic level.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone else want to add to that? I think Brian did a very good job. I don't know if anyone has a different example they want to bring up.
Well, absolutely. I think Brian did a great job explaining that. I think the focus on our positive reinforcements is really strong, especially at the Coombs School level with Falcon Eggs, for example. But we are a PBIS school, no place for hate school, so we're trying to reinforce and build that language for students, and it is making sure we're recognizing that positive and keeping the data when kids are struggling. So we know areas in the building perhaps that are more challenging for students. If it's waiting in line for the bathroom, then we can provide supports there in how we wait and how to limit the number of students, for example, in that bathroom. If we see times of day in our data where behaviors are more prevalent, often it is during transitions to specials or back, or transitions back and forth from recess, then we're able to help put supports in place and more modeling for students. And it's really about using that data again to help us problem solve for the individual students as well as groups of students.
Yeah, excellent.
And-
And I just want to interject, because I wanted to bring this aspect up, because this is a district that really looks at the whole child. I think it's important that we look at this from all different angles, and our parents at home understand that. Hope, I hope you were gonna say.
I just wanted to add one thing from a district perspective. The way we look at behavior in Mashpee, we follow the model of the collaborative problem solving, think kids out of Mass General Hospital. And the mindset behind collaborative problem solving is that kids do well if they can. And if they can't, there's a skill deficit. And it's our job to figure out what is that skill deficit. Often it's communication. It might be social skills. It might be adaptive skills. It might be an academic skill that is manifesting in a behavioral challenge because the kid, especially at the older grades, but really across the board, they don't want to admit that something is challenging academically, and it's much easier to go for the laugh or to disrupt the classroom. So we take a curiosity perspective, a lens of really being detectives around what is the behavior communicating to us, and then where is the skill deficit that's creating that behavior, and then how do we teach that skill? Because we're really good at teaching reading and teaching math, but sometimes with behavioral challenges, it feels more personal, and it feels a little bit harder as adults to respond to behavior as a learning opportunity, which is really what it is. So we've done a lot of work over the years in shifting the adult mindsets around that, and I think we've seen really positive relationship outcomes as a result.
Okay, so why don't we shift a little bit and talk a little bit about why this MTSS process is so important, and it's important that our parents and our guardians understand what this is.
Well, parents are our partners, and it is really important that they do understand the process. They also will be notified if a student is determined to have that skill deficit. We want their help and support. It's an important role that the parents have because they can help at home. They can help reinforce how important the classroom is. Being in school regularly is so critical because that's how we fill those gaps and deficits in their learning.
Thanks. Anybody else want to add to that, or you can say no? Okay, so let's move on to so what has the work of the district been for the last year or so? And I know that we have done MTSS before, but there's been a rededication and rethinking and retraining of this. So I would love to accentuate and celebrate the work that's been done, not just by the people in this room, but the people in our classrooms as well.
Yeah, I can jump in there. I will focus on the last couple months, but it's worth just a quick kind of recap of kind of where this came from. This work started years ago. The district got a pretty significant grant to bring in a bunch of consultants to help make a really major shift in how we kind of organize our school and how we allocate resources, how we respond to students when they're not meeting academic expectations and behavioral expectations. And so kind of following from that grant, there's been a lot of work and a lot of changes. We've adjusted special education instruction. We've improved how we identify students who are behind, improved ways to create additional opportunities for students who are ahead as well. The data piece that we talked about with STAR, our students now take STAR from kindergarten. From kindergarten to 10th grade, and we use that data to drive our instruction, and that was like a direct outgrowth of MTSS, and that's a significant thing that in a lot of ways we were kind of ahead of the curve in Massachusetts. MTSS is now a pretty well-established expectation across Massachusetts for districts and for schools, and we've been well ahead of that. One place that we haven't really kind of fully realized MTSS in a sustainable, consistent way is something called tiered interventions. That's what Hope was talking about at the very beginning. It's sort of what you do when students are behind, and how you build in the time and the resources at the classroom level to support students who are, having trouble with math or having trouble with reading or having trouble with behavior. So that's been the focus of the group of teachers and administrators over the last few months, and that we're now in the process of kind of bringing to life in our schools at the start of this school year. That's been tricky because we have a bunch of systems that are in place already, and we need to kind of build on that work, but also recognize that some of it needs to be adjusted. So we've been doing a kind of a process of looking back at everything that we've done so far and revamping some of it and dropping some things that are out of date at this point, and also establishing some new processes. And those are really kind of taking shape right now, which is kind of exciting at the school level.
I think historically too, it's one thing that all families in Mashpee should be really proud of. The schools have never settled for where we are. We have always worked to improve our practice, and Mashpee is never afraid to try something new, to really push forward our practice. And I know it makes me proud of Mashpee as a parent, as an administrator here in the district.
Good. Thanks. All right, so let's kind of switch back a little bit, and give advice to our parents and guardians. So what should a parent or a guardian do if their child is receiving tiered instruction? What are some things that they could do or keep in mind?
I think the most important thing that a parent or family can do is stay in touch with the classroom teacher. These interventions on average last about 4 to 6 weeks. It depends on the intensity that they're delivered. Sometimes the interventions, they meet every day, so you don't need the full 6 weeks. Other times it could be 3 times a week, for example. But the teacher will have that data, will have information, and it is important to stay in touch with the classroom teacher. If you ever have concerns, that communication is really vitally important. And if you have other questions, reach out to the administrators, reach out to all of us. Really, we're here for you.
Yeah, and this is this whole push and having I don't know if I want to date myself, but you used to have different reading groups and people were reading different things, and right now what we're doing is we're having students do the same same kind of work in our regular classrooms, and we're working to keep them up with the regular curriculum, and that is different. I don't necessarily think that parents at home who, and it's a normal reaction to judge based on what your experience is, that experience has changed for this generation of children, and MTSS is the way that we're keeping children and meeting them where they are to keep them up with the regular curriculum as opposed to giving different learning experiences.
Yeah, it comes down to a civil rights issue. I mean, the students, you're entitled to access the grade level curriculum of where you fall. And so it's our job as the educators to make sure that we're providing all students with that opportunity. And so, Brian was saying it's exciting. It's one of my favorite things we get to talk about because to me, there's no greater charge from a public school district than to make sure every child gets what they need so that they can have the future that they want. And really, when I think back to the dark ages of the 80s and 90s when I was in school, I still remember, getting pulled out for something and taking something in a different location from my peers and other kids going out and you never knew quite why. And, our kids, now I'm raising my own children and they don't have that same sort of mindset. Every kid is a fifth grader or is a second grader. And it doesn't mean they're all needing or doing the same things, but they do have the same opportunities. And that's what we're trying to refine and improve on. But again, if we look at what is the goal of MTSS, it's that your children get to learn and be and do all the things that they want to in life and that they're supported in those endeavors.
Yeah, and and I can think of hundreds of cases where you had a kid who was struggling when they were in 6th or 7th grade, and you see them as a sophomore, and they have grown and matured and learned new skills, and you're just absolutely amazed. And that really, I think, as an educator, is the gift that you get. But with that, that's more of a challenge than having the same kind of client sitting in chairs in front of you, right? So I often joke it's not like the dentist. They've got one mouth to clean or put a filling in. They've got 26 or 27 sitting in chairs, right? So how are we supporting teachers in this effort and in our recommitment to it?
So I'll start there. This is Hope. One of the ways is dedicating significant amounts of professional development time to it. So this year, all of our half days beginning in November will be a group of teacher leaders. We'll be working with administrators to continue to work through and refine our MTSS processes and also our resources for teachers. Another way that we are incredibly well resourced in Mashpee, and the community supports the schools financially in such wonderful ways. And so we're able to provide lots of different learning opportunities for kids based on what they need because we're able to fund that. And so I think our Chromebook access, there's really nothing that a student could need that we can't provide for them. And so I think that teachers are provided with professional development, supportive administrators, and like materials and stuff on top of having small class sizes. You said 26, 27, but it's really 16, 17. And so they can provide more individualized instruction that way. So those are huge pieces.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in on that, I mean, when you're looking at data for individual kids, I mean, the less children you have, the more you can spend looking at that data. And the other thing I think it's important that parents at home realize is that it's not just teachers sitting looking at it. It's a team of teachers working together, sharing ideas, sharing experiences, what worked, what didn't work. This is a child that's showing this challenge. What did you do with that child or someone similar? And it's the collective effort, and we always say that, a group is smarter than individuals, right? So we're giving teachers the opportunity to do that work, right?
Yeah, just very much piggybacking on that same idea. As a teacher, the most frustrating thing among the most frustrating things is having a student who's behind and not knowing what to do. And it's just, it's frustrating, it's heartbreaking, and you've tried a bunch of things and you're sort of out of ideas or whatever. So I think one way that this is supporting teachers is by providing a system that they can turn to when they're sort of like running out of ideas on their own, right? So, we don't have a silver bullet that solves all the problems, but we are creating a system that is a place for teachers to turn when they're at that point where the tier 1 isn't working and they are seeing their kids being behind and they need some support on what to do next.
And there really is nothing more rewarding than when you
Yeah.
hear
Yes.
a student say, I get it.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my goodness. It's just the most rewarding thing that you could ever get
Well,
as a
and not only
teacher.
that, but the student gets a feeling of accomplishment
Mhm.
and pride, and they're gonna keep trying harder
Yes.
to have that happen again.
Yeah.
Right, and
Yeah.
it builds, all of this is built on relationships
Yeah.
that we have in the classroom. And I think that's another great strength in all of our schools. Our teachers care.
Yeah.
And they show that to students, and those relationships help motivate.
I can share just one story that's kind of on the behavioral side, of a student who came to us from elsewhere, and really had a hard time at his prior school, was suspended, and we used some data on the parts of the day that he was having kind of hardest time, and we made some adjustment to his schedule and had him tied in with a break with a counselor and used the resources of the school. And he just had the most, I think that he had a life-changing year in school last year. Like he went from a track that was going to take him in a place that was, not a high likelihood of success to a really great year last year. And I think that kids do well if they can mindset that Hope mentioned before, and the sort of like database decision making. Here are the things, like we see the things that are like kind of causing hiccups. Here are some adjustments that we can make, and then continuing to adjust as we go along. Like those things were pointed his direction in a different life than it was headed before coming to Mashpee.
Excellent.
It really is empowering, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like you can see that change.
Yeah, well, that's the extra bonus you get as an educator, right?
Yes.
It's not always in the checkbook, but it's in those smiling faces, and it's in those stories and that success that keep us moving forward.
But for the child to feel that it's not me, I can do this, look at what I can achieve. It's fabulous.
All right, any other closing thoughts from our all-star panel here, folks?
I love that.
Yeah.
I'm just proud to be a part of Mashpee and our commitment to serving all of our kids equally.
And as this is Hope. As an employee, I echo what Mary Kate said. I've worked in other districts and have had wonderful experiences, but there's something very special about Mashpee. I'm also a parent here in Mashpee, and I can absolutely attest to the incredible care and love that our teachers and staff members provide to all of our students. And that is, there's something really special about this place. So I feel very grateful that I'm raising my family here as well.
Yeah, I would just add the growth mindset kind of part that comes with MTSS, that we're just recognizing that we just want to keep working to improve and get better. And this is that mindset is built into MTSS, and our work on MTSS sort of exemplifies it as well.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank all of you for taking time of your day to come and have this conversation. People at home, we will be putting links into the liner notes in the podcast, so you can do some more digging on your own once you do that, and get this published for next Wednesday. So again, thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
This is Dr. Dave Thompson. Thank you for listening to the Superintendent Spotlight podcast. This will be a monthly podcast, so please subscribe and give us a thumbs up or 5 stars depending on the platform you're using. If you have a suggestion for future topics, please send them along to the district office, and have a nice day.